This is an interesting question. How has your opinion of fascism changed? And I would say that it's largely changed because I have decided that like fascism as a analytical category is too historically contextual, too enmeshed in a specific extinct political economy and cultural matrix, that it is functionally incompatible with the current moment. You can't apply fascism to now because the definition of fascism, like we talk about, think words have definitions, and those definitions have a bunch of different subsidiaries to them. And some of them are really thick and bounding, and other of them are sort of arbitrary and can be passed away. And I'd say one of the load-bearing structures of fascism is the specific context of mass politics. I don't think you can have fascism without mass politics. So therefore, I think it as an analytical category, it is incompatible. So when we see the discussion of fascism as it plays out in the media, what we're actually seeing is people seizing this extinct concept, infusing it with all of this passionate emotional connection because of what fascism historically stands for, and then demanding a relationship to fascism that people were morally obligated. Through the lens of history, we look back and we say, oh, people were morally obligated to align themselves against fascism. And we can apply that to the current moment. We can identify a fascism and then align against it that way. And I say that the purpose of that debate is to never be decided. It is to never be applied, because we're only asking people, how should I feel about this thing? Not, how does this thing impact my life? Not, how does this thing integrate into my daily struggles? And I know that for some people, fascism, or like its social remnant, is a live threat to their life. But I think that the emotional fixation on it pulls everyone away from meaningful questions. Because think about it. How do you determine the question of whether it's fascism? Answer, when there's a coup and when the dictatorship happens and when there's camps and when we have that psychic break from the eternal present and we go back into history. We're all fantasizing about one way or the other, which is what the liberal wants, because the liberal cannot imagine stepping down from his position. He can only imagine annihilation. This is the death drive of liberalism, which fascism is an expression of in one context, in the mass cultural, mass political context of post-World War II Europe. In the context of global consumer capitalism at the end of history, I do not think you can speak of a political subject capable of carrying out fascism. But does that mean there's not going to be concentration camps? Does that mean there's not going to be genocides? Not just deaths through malignant neglect, which is what we're seeing now, but actual proactive regimes of civilizational extinguishment. It just means that it's not going to have the comforting costume that allows you to imagine yourself to be in the moral position of a Jew or a communist under fascism, which is what you're actually seeking. You don't want to win. Winning is impossible. You're a liberal, remember. We're all liberals. The liberal subject is telling us, the liberal it is expressing itself in the culture that we all consume, because it's all made by and for libs, specifically people who are adhered to capitalism as liberal subjects because they have the money to make and consume entertainment, and everyone else, to one degree or another, looks on and deals with this crisis, this failure to take power, which is the fundamental weakness at the heart of the left side of liberalism, the socially progressive form of liberalism that is the positive, necessary, cultural byproduct of capitalism. Like, this is underestimated. You can't have class power executed on a global scale, which you need, without the establishment, first of the liberal subject, then of identity, so that people can organize in solidarity around people that they recognize as occupying a common condition. And that's not just their class position. It's also all the cultural markings and all that shit. That has to be built, and then it has to be broken down a little bit. You have to get national identities, and then the identity as the worker, and this is in the heart of Europe anyway, where capitalism is forged without being able to, it is being forged here, not imposed. It's like being collectively built by everybody as they struggle, which is different than how it occurs when it's then being exported to the rest of the world. But what the liberal really wants is just to be Sophie Scholl. They want to be in the concentration camp. If they have to die, and that's what they're accepting we can't change course, which means we have to die. Remember, they could die well in pursuit of revolution, but they know in their heart they won't. Push comes to shove, they know in their heart that they will not sacrifice that. So that means that they are yearning an innocent death. And the only innocent death is one where they are punished, basically, by their own sins in the form of a fascist annihilation. The fascist is the other pole of capital, the pole around the manual exercise of power in the form of slave economies, direct extraction, primitive extraction, the dirty end of the stick of capital accumulation, because it accumulates by dispossession of others to build the furnace, to fill the furnaces in the center. And there needs to be someone near the furnaces directing the flow, and there need to people be temporally separated. Simultaneously at the same time, they're geographically separated out at the edge where the real exploitation is happening. And that creates another pole, a liberal identity, which also takes the end annihilation of all as a given, because it cannot recognize beyond its narrowly constrained class-bound identity. But instead of being punished for the sins, why not just decide that the sins are actually good? Why not decide that all the stuff that you're supposed to feel bad about, you should actually feel good about, because it's an expression of God's will. Because the natural order is the actual will of God. And man against man, primitive, brutal accumulation, whoever wins is by virtue of having won correct. Might makes right. In that, like in the ritual of that creation, you birth a religious conception. Like in all that bloodshed and those eruptions of culture, new forms of culture form. And they are, it's a class identity. It is a petit bourgeois, because if you have a lot of money, a lot of power, you don't have to get your hands dirty, and you choose not to. You would rather stay in the salons and abstractly dominate and then feel bad about it and exercise a politics of guilt. Or you can be out in the fucking trenches of colonialism and slavery, and then, class or on wage slavery. Like being foremen and owners of small capital, battling their restive labor population. And there, you can't keep those liberal pieties. You can't imagine an idea where you're God, you're the mind of God. No, you're subject to God, and God is nature, and God tells you who wins and who is. In the guts of the loser, you see the reflected face of the winner. In the pooled blood of the loser of the battle, you see reflected God's choice, a natural occurrence. That is what Christianity got grafted on top of very clumsily in the medieval period as a way to shore up collapsing structure of the Roman Empire under ecological pressure. The same process we're now re-carrying out. And it was like, it had to be reforged during the Reformation to fit around the new structures of capitalism that were emerging out of the need for complexity to fight this war of all against all on the ass end of the fucking Eurasian continent. So this is all a round way of saying that I think fascism, don't talk about it. Historically, fascinating. Let people draw conclusions of their own mind, but do not press an agenda that relates to the current condition, because it's not the same condition. We don't have the social base to carry out fascism. And you can say, well, we have techno-fascism. It's like, yes, but the techno part does not require political legitimization. The more that it's techno, the more that it's algorithm, the less you need a formal politics of enacting it. Like the horsepower to fascism provided by the mass party is now done algorithmically and electronically. So there is no need for that energy being socially captured, which is what is going to happen. You need social containers for fascism because it will not emerge out of this depoliticized, declassed, atomized social base. So if it's too techno, then the fascism word doesn't apply. What is it? Some have called it techno-feudalism. Others have said that that's not correct. I understand where they're coming from when they say this is just going to be more capitalism. And I think that's true, but it doesn't tell the whole story because you have to have a social superstructural sleeve to go around it. Because we've never just called it capitalism. You know, we've also had all these other structures running through it, like fascism, like liberalism, like the rule of law, like the socialist movement, like actual existing socialism in communist states, post-colonial third worldism. We have all these things that we wrap around a process that is globally just capitalism reproducing itself. But the people don't know that. This is all happening through them. The world spirit is acting through them. And they're just acting out their politics. We have to have a word for that because we're still passively political subjects in that we need a political vocabulary to understand the world. So what kind of capitalism is it going to be when you see a collapse of the public sphere, and which is a real thing that is really happening? And you have to have a word to address that. And I think the feudalism comes in because what we're talking about is we're talking about the disappearance of a public sphere of equal rights guaranteed by superseding human structures like constitutional orders, legal ideas, that we would be bound by concepts. That is the liberal dream of society. It's the only way you could have capitalism without it destroying itself. The 17th century proved this. You could not have a religious Christendom with modern technology of war. That's what the 30 Years' War proved. So that energy had to go elsewhere. It was pushed off into the New World in the form of colonies that did most of the work of like providing a social valve. But it also changed institutions within Europe. And it moved them towards this neutral space where people could exercise rights as citizens, not as members of a godly communion, which was the underlying assumption of medieval feudalism. Yeah, they fought all the time. But in the fighting, the right won, the God's chosen was revealed. It was a trial for control of Europe by combat, according to the chivalric code of the warrior caste who took over after the end of the Roman Empire, when it could no longer sustain its bureaucratic function. They took Christianity, turned it into a structure to accommodate that, but it comes under too much pressure once you have the degree of urbanization, literacy, and technology that comes smack into the Little Ice Age and the end of the medieval war period, drastically changing agricultural inputs. That creates a new pressure. That creates a new set of contradictions. Protestantism emerges out of that by necessity. It's following the energy through the system as it brings itself into life across continents, because it's also pushing off all the riffraff and all the anxious money to the New World to do all the real massacring and expropriation on people who aren't and have never been considered part of Christendom. But that medieval space was one where there's no such thing as an individual right. There's no such thing as a citizen. Everyone is subject to someone else, and all relationships are bilateral across these contracts. It's bound. It's binding people. But it's not being bound. This is the difference. It's not being bound by our collective agreement in the concepts of constitutional order and law that come out of the creation of a secular bourgeois subject, but something from before that level of abstraction, when God's will writ in the world is the sum total of the right. And so who is in charge is there by God's will. Their rule flows from their legitimacy. And what enthroned capitalism was the creation of this neutral space, which diffused so much social conflict and allowed for capitalism to be built. But now we're at a terminal point when the illusion of freedom, basically, that the proletarian had been given under the conditions of extractive capitalism with a frontier, which was redistribution towards the center from the periphery geographically. Once you get a global market and once you get the end of a frontier, you are now cannibalizing, which means you can no longer afford to send anything to the center. And in fact, the stuff that's hoarded in the center is going to start being dissolved by its consumption, like the fat on a starving body. And that means that it cannot sustain the legitimacy of these institutions like constitutional law. People believed in them because they delivered. They don't believe in them now because they no longer deliver, but we still depend on them. That is a contradiction that's going to break the whole thing. And that is a political trajectory towards a political break. But what's going to stop the political break, I think, is that we're going to lose that public sphere again. We're going to lose the public space. It is no longer going to be affordable. It's going to be lined out of the budget. They're going to say, okay, you people can't have public space anymore because public space implies a level of social obligation across individual relationship of domination. And that can't happen. Can't have it, Henry. Henry, I can't have it. I can't have them commiserating like that. So that means we can't have the people commiserating in a public space because, yeah, they will destroy each other. We'll have civil war. Instead, we have a new regime of bilateral contractual right relationships between us and corporate entities. Individuals and corporate entities. Those are going to be the new bilateral social tie. And that is the reinscription of force over the abstraction of rule of law and human rights that was only possible under the social conditions of expansive capitalism. Capitalism in contraction cannot sustain a public. So, like, is that feudalism? Force imposes an imposition by force through technology this time, as opposed, well, different technology, not, the church, and like arquebuses. Now, like the entire digital infrastructure of our lives. It's imposed by force, and that force is its legitimacy. You need a job, probably. You need products. You can only get those products through a coercive relationship with these more powerful institutions. And you're then slotted in a hierarchy with other ones. And it is not imposed by the deliberations of the polis, the way we fantasize it is under expansionary capitalism, but rather under these new conditions, it's pure divine right, the restoration of a divine right, which is why it makes sense that guys like Peter Thiel are all like Catholics, because they think, oh, we're going back to feudalism. But of course, this is where language gets tricky, and why Wittgenstein is essentially correct, how it's so hard to really get at the nub of problems, because so much of them are often willful misunderstandings.